Hi, my name is Misty. Welcome back to my channel. So I don't have a big impactful speech or presentation to give you today because that's just not my forte. But I'm just hoping that the story of how I brought this book to life will inspire you to not give up on your dreams and to keep going and to show that whatever you're struggling with is still very possible for you. Okay, I'm gonna take these little things out of here because they're distracting. But I started this book almost 4 years ago. So in November of 2019, that was during National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, if you don't know. That's where writers can come up with and write a story of 50,000 words all in the month of November. And at that point, all I knew was that I wanted to write a story about a girl who was a rat exterminator. And looking back on that, like, I have no idea why I wanted to write a story like that. It seems very silly. But that was just the idea that I guess I ran with. So I tried to map out a plot in October so that I could start writing the book in November. And actually this video that I'm gonna link up here is the video where I came up with the first iteration of my outline for this book. So if you want to watch that and do some like historical archaeology, you're welcome to. That's the cool thing about having a YouTube channel is like, especially if you're videoing the process of writing your books, because then you can look back and see all of the different, everything that happened leading up to the culmination of a big project. So I think that's something that's really cool about having a YouTube channel as a writer. Basically, I worked hard all of November of 2019 writing this book, and I actually didn't win. So to win NaNoWriMo, you need to have written 50,000 words, and I got really close. I got to 45,000 words, which I still think is pretty good. So for 1 month, writing 45,000 words is pretty good of something that like I didn't even have an outline for prior to October. So I think that's really good still. In my heart, I won that NaNoWriMo, even though I didn't really. But I remember when I was at about 45,000 words, I just remember being so exhausted and fed up with the story that I just didn't have within me to write the extra 5,000 words that month. So back then, the story was completely different than the story that it is today. The first version had the main character, whose name is Sari, running under a mountain to save her sister who had been kidnapped, and eventually defeating an evil queen that turned out to be her grandmother. So it was this completely different story than what it is today. It also had one of the antagonists getting kidnapped and just all kinds of stuff that you will not read in this story, but you'll read a lot of other cool stuff though, I hope. I hope you'll still like it. There's no evil queen that turns out to be grandma, but maybe in the future. Maybe in the future. There was a lot to the first iteration of this book. And actually, after I wrote the first draft, I was going to turn it into, I had all these plans. I was going to turn it into a duology and then a trilogy. And then I was like, oh, it could have 4 books, or actually it could have 5. But then I was going to turn it into a serial, which is like a series of shorter books, like novellas. I was going to do all of that. And then I condensed it back down into like a trilogy of full-length novels. But then I'm like, no, maybe I'll just make it a duology. And so then I condensed it back down, and then I was like, I don't really want to do that either. I'll just make it a standalone. And I went through so many different ideas and iterations for how I wanted to do this. Actually, and I came up with like a different outline for every single version. So I remember like spending so much time outlining that I started to wonder like if I was even a writer anymore, or if I was just an outliner. Because I literally came up with so many outlines for this book. It's actually ridiculous. And I still have most of them, although I did delete some of them because I'm like, this is just too much. It was hard to even know like what I was doing anymore in either Google Drive or in Trello, which I use to outline, because there were so many versions. I eventually started like putting things into folders and deleting some stuff to kind of like make it easier to even work on the project. That's how bad it was. So I actually went through a lot of different titles as well. In the original draft, I was actually gonna call it In the Golden Afterlight, and I actually have it right here. And there's a little bug on it that just fell off. But I was originally gonna call it In the Golden Afterlight. This is a printout of the NaNoWriMo version of this book, the 45,000 word version. So I really do like this title. If it was just up to me, I think I would have just went with the title In the Golden Afterlight, because it was like, I don't know, it just seems poetic, and it really worked with, at the time, the kingdom's name was Afterlight, and there was like this whole thing about it, and it was always sunset, and it was like a fantasy setting. I ended up taking that out because it actually didn't, it only served the story in the first version, but then in the previous, or in like the next versions, it didn't have any purpose anymore for it to be always sunset, and so I just took that out. And also the title just was not very marketable. Like if you were to look on Amazon for a book and you saw a book called In the Golden Afterlight and it just had like a girl on the front cover or whatever, you wouldn't know what it was about, and so you probably wouldn't take a chance on it. That's the unfortunate truth of marketing books, is that you sometimes have to go with more generic titles in order to actually market to people, because people want to read more of what they already like. And if people aren't familiar with something, they're probably not going to take as much of a chance on it. So this is a side note, but that's actually the reason that I retitled my other book, The Chocolatier's Secret. Originally it was called These Clockwork Stars, which I still love that title too, but it just wasn't marketable. It is what it is. You have to go with what works, right? So the next title I had was Flute of Stone, which I really like that title too, especially since it is a Pied Piper retelling. But back when I had this title, it was more of a Pied Piper retelling. Nowadays it's like a looser retelling, but it was pretty it was like closer to the original fairy tale back then. So the flute didn't actually end up being as big of a deal in the story, just like the kingdom's name and the whole sunset thing didn't end up being a thing. The flute didn't end up being that big of a deal, so the title didn't really fit as much. I still could have probably called it Flute of Stone and gotten away with it, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to come up with a title that really fit the book. So then my next idea was just Castle of Cards, which is also a good title, except I was looking it up on Amazon and there's some other books that are already called Castle of Cards. And I really wanted it to be a unique title. I wanted it to be its own thing. I wanted to just expand on that Castle of Cards because castle is actually a keyword for my genre, for YA fantasy and fairy tale retellings. Castle is a good keyword to have in your title. And so I thought it would be cool to have another keyword in my title as well. I landed on Castle of Cards and Shadows. It fits the book really well, and if you read it, you'll see why. I also actually did a poll on one of those poll sites that you can use. I forget the actual one that I used, but basically I put a list of a bunch of different titles I was thinking of at the time, and a lot of people that I didn't know voted. And so most of the votes came back as Castle of Cards and Shadows out of that list that I gave them. So it kind of gave me a little bit more of a push in that direction, because I thought, okay, well, it might be marketable then if more people like it than the other ones. And in the midst of all this writing, rewriting, outlining, re-outlining, restructuring, I wanted to give up so many times. I was like, I'm done with this. This is so complicated. This is so hard. There's so many moving pieces. I'm honestly sick of it. Like, I was so tired of it that I just wanted to give up. And then in 2021, we moved from Wisconsin to Michigan. We moved into my parents' house. And at that time I was like, okay, I'm completely done with this book. I'm going to move from Wisconsin and I'm going to move on to a completely different book as well. I'm ready to work on something else, and I'm just going to shelve this project. Just like I did The Cook's Poison, which is another book that I actually finished the draft of this, so yay me. But I ended up shelving this because I just couldn't make it work. This was the first book that I fully wrote like the whole draft to in my whole entire life, so it will always hold a very special place in my heart. And I still might make it maybe a middle grade or something in the future, or I might still make it a YA. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to say like what I will do or won't do with this book, but it just didn't end up working out the way that I wanted it to. This is shelved for now. And I was going to do the same thing with Castle of Cards and Shadows. I'm like, I'm done. But for whatever reason, I just could not get away from it. The idea was like in the back of my mind, just begging me to come back to it. And finally, it just got to be too overwhelming. For some reason, like whenever I have this idea in my head, it just like, I need to keep going with it and see where it goes. So I thought to myself, okay, if I'm gonna come back to this story, I'm gonna have to simplify. I cannot make it this confusing and try to work on it again. So what I did was, I thought, okay, it won't even be a full-length novel. It'll just be a novella. I'm just gonna distill this story down into its base elements. I'm gonna get rid of everything, all of the different plot points and things that are just too confusing, that don't work, that don't tie into anything. I'm gonna get rid of all of that, and I'm just going to bring the book down to its base essence, and I'm just gonna write that as a novella so that I can move on. So that's what I started to do. And at the time, I was also going through major job stress, and it actually led to a state of profound burnout. I was so burned out. I could not focus on anything for more than like a minute. I'm not kidding. I struggled to even explain to you what my burnout was like because it was really, really bad. And I'm sure a lot of you have also experienced something similar, because I know it's very common, especially these days. And so I'm not special, but I definitely did experience that. But just when I had figured out a new direction for my story, I was starting to make some progress. Even though I was burned out, I was still trying, and I was desperately trying every day just to do a little more and a little more. My parents' house burned down actually, and we lost everything. There were a couple of things in my parents' garage that were in totes that we were able to save. So thank goodness we had a couple of things, but believe me when I tell you we lost pretty much everything. And at first I didn't think that that would affect me very much because I didn't think that I was that attached to stuff. Like, it's just stuff. And now we were homeless. So we moved in with my husband's parents back in Wisconsin. So we had to move back to Wisconsin that we had moved away from. We tried to move to Michigan. And this absolutely destroyed my mental health. I was already in burnout. And so then I slipped into this deep, deep depression that I did not think I would ever come out of. I didn't think I would ever write again. I struggled every day. I could not get out of bed. Most days I laid in bed or just laid around. I did not want to do anything. I had a constant feeling of like that awful anxiety feeling that you get in your gut. Sometimes I had that constantly all day, every day. I had trouble sleeping, and when I would sleep, I would grind my teeth. And yeah, I gave up on the story. Again, I vowed I would never come back to it. I did not want to be a writer anymore. I didn't want to write anything. I didn't want to do anything. Eventually we ended up finding a house in Michigan, and the housing market was really bad at that time too, because anytime something would get listed, it would immediately get snapped up. So, and we were in a different state, so we couldn't even like go see a house right away when it would get listed. Like, we would have to drive 3 hours to come here and see it, or try to get a realtor to like do a video walkthrough or something. And you really do need to see a house in person before you buy it. And so it was really, really hard to get a house. We actually looked into like apartments and renting and different stuff like that too. But eventually we did end up finding a house in Michigan. We put an offer in on it the same day it listed, and we were able to get it. We actually had to bid a little bit higher to go over other people that were bidding on it too. And we closed on it in August of 2022. So exactly a year ago from when I'm filming this. And ever since then, we've been slowly rebuilding our life, you know, replacing some of what we lost. So this is like my book collection now. It used to be so much larger, but I don't have any of those anymore. But so this is like what I've rebought since then. And I'm trying to work on it. I really want like a ton of books in this office, so I'm trying hard, but this is what I have again so far. And I've been doing a lot of thrifting. So like this cute little teapot and stuff like this. I've been finding a lot of cute stuff thrifting. So I'm not saying I'm going without. I'm definitely blessed. After a long, long time, my depression finally did start lifting. And when it did, my desire to write did come back. So I was able to come back to the story and try to write it again in its simplified form. But it was slow going because moving out of depression is definitely a process. And so it took me months and months to get like a workable draft that I could send to beta readers. And during that time, I was able to build on the story a bit more and flesh it out, add some new plot points that actually went with the story. So it actually did end up being a full length, like this is a full length novel. Turned out better than my previous versions would have. So I was able to send that draft to my beta readers and I got their feedback. And then after several more rounds of very intense edits, I got it done. I'm very proud of the book that it ended up being. And so now in August 2023, it's finally done. And I can say that, and it feels so surreal. It does not feel this should ever be a possibility because I've worked on it on and off so much for the past 4 years that it seems impossible that it's done. It really does. But I just wanted to encourage somebody, and I just wanted to let you know that literally if I could somehow find a way to make this book happen, there's no reason why you can't do anything that you want, anything you set your mind to, and just pursue your dreams and your goals, because there's no reason that you can't if I could somehow do this. And it was so impossible. It felt so impossible for so long. And most of the time when I was working on it, I did not want to be working on it. I was tired. I have a full-time job. I have 2 kids. I have a full-time life. I have other commitments. And it's literally just every day, one foot in front of the other. So I know that sounds cheesy, but it is what it is. And if you are still alive and you're still breathing, you are still able to achieve your goals. And I believe that 100%. It doesn't matter how old you are, where you are in life, how trapped you feel in your day job or whatever, you can find a way to make it work. If I can, literally anyone can. If you're depressed, I totally feel that. I know full well what that's like. And my only advice would be to not to isolate yourself, because it's so easy. The easiest thing in the world to just isolate yourself and not talk to anyone and don't tell anyone what you're going through and just be in your room and sleep all the time. I would encourage you not to do that, because it's so much more effective with recovery to just tell people what you're going through and let them help you. Depression is not forever, and brighter days are coming. And I just want to encourage you that brighter days are coming. So I hope my little story motivated you in some way. Thank you so much for watching. It is release week for Castle of Cards and Shadows. It is release week. So the link, if you are interested in reading this book, the link will always be in the description down below. And I will see you again tomorrow with another release week video.